Vault 22 is a really interesting vault. It's unlike many of the vaults we've come across in the game because Vault-Tec was doing a rather unique experiment there. But never fear, it is just as morally twisted and dark as all of the others. But before we go and visit Vault 22, there are 2 quests we need to pick up. Well, 3, really. There's a Brotherhood of Steel quest involving a companion you could pick up, but we're going to focus on 2 today. The first takes us to the Thorn, near West New Vegas. The Thorn is a sewer, and inside the sewer we find a woman named Red Lucy who stages caged monster fights. Citizens of New Vegas will come down here and bet on the caged fights. You can too, and you can even participate in them. This is a really fun place to explore. We're gonna save this for a video on another day. We're focused on Vault 22, and Red Lucy sends us there to get Mantis Eggs.
The Thorn needs newborn specimens that will one day grow to honor us with their blood. Bring me a dozen giant mantis' eggs. If you accomplish this, I might gift you with greater tasks in the future. You'll find egg-carrying mantises in the wasteland, but a wise hunter would search at a mantis' breeding ground, like the nearby ruins of Vault 22.
She needs these mantis eggs so that she can rear up a bunch of mantises to fight in the arena. Once we have the quest from Red Lucy, we can then go to Camp McCarran. Inside the airport terminal, in the medical room on the southeastern end, we find a doctor named Dr. Thomas Hildern.
Vault 22. Where to begin? Imagine, if you will, the wasteland in bloom. Vast fields of corn that grow from seeds and produce their bounty in the space of a month. Orchards of trees, their branches weighed halfway to the ground, hung with fat, ripe oranges, a harvest that could feed a city or a nation. And all this, requiring no more than a few drops of precious water and the efforts of only a handful of human farmers. But what if I was to tell you that the wasteland can yield an endless bounty, and that the secret may lie a mere few miles from where we stand? We need only reach out and take it, and for that I need you. I believe that the inhabitants of Vault 22 unlock the secrets of vegetative growth. Plants are spilling from their gate. No one tends them, no one waters them, yet they multiply and spread in all directions. Find the reason for this miraculous growth, and I promise you the OSI will see that you are generously compensated. Vaults typically contain a server room on a lower level, where they would have backed up their research data. A computer room, you understand? Download all the information on the central server to your Pip-Boy, and you'll be certain to bring me any notes or samples that you find, won't you?
He's a wealth of information about a wide range of lore topics. But let's not get sidetracked, we're focusing on Vault 22, so we need to go to Vault 22 to gather some research that had been done there. Part of me is a little bothered by the idea that we might be benefiting from science that was gathered by performing on probably unwilling Vault dwellers. But before we pass judgment, let's head to Vault 22. As we leave Thomas Hildern, a scientist named Angela Williams runs up to us.
Did Dr. Hildern... This really isn't any of my business, but did he give you a job?
This Angela Williams is perceptive. Now, how did she know that Hildern had sent us to Vault 22?
You're not the first person he sent to Vault 22, and I know he'd never tell you. There were a lot of mercs, one after another. None of them came back. Then about a week ago, there was a scientist, Keely. She's unusual, not the sort of person you'd expect, but she's an absolute genius, and he didn't mention her? Maybe my kind of money wouldn't appeal to your average merc. But I'm willing to pay you if you'll find Keely and make sure she's safe. Isn't right leaving her out there. No idea if she's alive or dead.
I see. So he had sent other mercenaries to Vault 22, and none of them returned. We can confront Hildern about this fact and negotiate a higher price.
No, you aren't the first person I've sent to the Vault. I'm sorry that I neglected to tell you, but I don't see how it makes any difference. I have no evidence that they're dead. 1,000 things could have happened between here and the Vault. They could have changed their minds and walked away. I wouldn't be much of a scientist if I leapt to conclusions without proof. All right? I'll admit that it's been difficult to find anyone willing to enter the Vault. And I'd rather get the data sooner than later. You have a deal. I'll double your reward if you bring me the data. but this is as high as my budget will allow.
Once done, we can finally head to Vault 22. We are not dissuaded by monsters and terror. We have done this thing before. Now, Vault 22 is actually really easy to get to. It's just west of New Vegas, but me and my stupidity, I walked all over the mountain range trying to find the entrance to Vault 22. I ended up leveling up, killing a whole bunch of cazadors. Oh, how I hate cazadors. I hate them. Did I mention how much I hate cazadors? I finally found Vault 22 while exploring this mountain range. It was in a valley below me. Luckily, I was perched high enough to be able to pick off the mantises that were guarding the entrance to the vault. As we approach, we see a bunch of warning signs. Stay out. The plants kill? The exterior of this vault is covered in plant life. Maybe Haldern is right. Maybe whatever secrets Vault-Tec has here will help the NCR grow more food to feed the troops and the citizens of the Mojave Wasteland for the foreseeable future. Upon entry, we find ourselves in a dark and smoky cavern, surrounded by plant life, including a bunch of mushrooms. To the left from the entrance, we find an abandoned campsite, a mattress on the ground, and a programmer's digest hiding underneath some pre-war books. On the nearby table is a duffel bag filled with some random loot and a terminal that we can activate. In this terminal, we find 2 Vault 22 expedition entries. These entries are from none other than the scientist Keeley. This is the scientist that Angela Williams asked us to save. Remember, we learned that she's a ghoul. She's over 200 years old. She's extremely intelligent, highly competent, perhaps even more so than Hildern himself. But she has gone missing. Luckily, she left behind these terminal entries so we can track her progress. We learned from the 2 logs in this terminal that her Pip-Boy no longer works, and so she had to hack into these terminal entries to leave her logs. This is lucky for us because now we can recover them. She notes that the logs on these terminals show that several people have entered this vault over the past few months, but that none have left alive. These must be none other than the mercenaries that Hildern sent, just like he sent you. She also notes that the growth on the inside should not exist. There's just not enough sunlight inside the vault to accommodate all of this rich, lush vegetation. What could be going on here? To find out, we can venture through the nearby door. Down the stairway, we come to a crossroads. Stairs leading down to other floors are to the left, and directly before us is a broken elevator. Now, if your repair is greater than 50, you can repair this elevator and skip a great portion of this vault, but that would defeat the purpose of creating a lore video about the vault, so we're going to repair the elevator and then take the stairs. Taking the stairs down to floor 2 brings us to the oxygen recycling wing of the vault. Here we again find a lot of lush, rich vegetation. Much of it is growing from vents hanging from the ceiling or coming up through the floor. In one of the rooms, we find another functional terminal. Here we find a note from the previous residents of the vault, which means that we're going to be tracking 2 stories here: the ultimate fate of the Vault 22 vault dwellers and the fate of scientist Keeley. There's only one entry here, and this talks of a noise complaint. A vault dweller registered a complaint saying that he or she heard noise coming from the air vents. This person is not alone. Many other people have complained of the same noise. Could this be the sound of plants growing in the air vents? After all, the majority of the plants we find in this vault are coming out of the vents. In one room, we find a big construction light set up shining purple light on some of the plants. This may be ultraviolet light, but who set this up? It seems like a strange thing for vault dwellers fleeing a vault to do. In this room, we find yet another duffel bag, remnants of scientist Keeley, which means that the nearby terminal must contain her log entries, and indeed we find log entries 3, 4, and 5. Keeley tells us that she thinks this floor was dedicated to studying atmospheric effects on plants with the goal of producing a generation of plants that produced high levels of oxygen. Keeley, being 200 years old, seems to be well aware of Vault-Tec's insidious reputation. She ends by saying, "Given the problems these vaults were known for, it seems like a reasonable avenue of research." Indeed, we have to agree with her, but of course we've just scratched the surface. What horrors has Vault-Tec in store for us? Keeley then tells us that the machines on this level have been modified to remove restraints that limited oxygen content and pressure produced by the plants. It seems like a strange restriction for these machines. I thought the goal was to have these plants produce more oxygen. Why would they even need restraints to begin with? Although oxygen is a flammable gas, maybe that has something to do with it. In her last note, Keeley says that she finally discovered the source of a strange chittering noise. she discovered the giant mantises. We discovered these too. We killed some outside the vault. But she says that she doesn't understand why mercenaries could die at the hands of these mantises. Yes, they're tough creatures, but a bunch of trained mercenaries should be able to handle themselves against some mantises. Maybe something darker lurks in this vault. We find an observation room with windows looking into a room filled with mushrooms. A nearby terminal has one note: inventory. We learned that the inventory for the storage room contained 14 nitrogen canisters, 2 pressure valves, 8 dispersal nozzles, 6 cartridge filters, Hepa 20, and 26 FRP piping. Note these Hepa cartridges because we need to collect these for the Brotherhood of Steel quest, Still in the Dark. We're not doing that quest right now, but I'll show you where to get the cartridges. With this floor explored, we can take the stairway down to level 3, food production. While exploring some of the now familiar vegetation, we get attacked by a strange creature called a spore carrier. I didn't even see this. It was camouflaged by the plants. And strangely, it has an almost humanoid shape. Could this be the reason that the mercenaries never returned? How many of these are in the vault? Inside one room with chalkboards everywhere, we find more of those purple lights shining on the plants. It's here that we find another terminal with some more of Keely's logs. She tells us that these spore creatures are actually the bodies of some of the scientists who used to work here. Their bodies are overgrown with some form of lichen. This is the level of the vault where she thinks the scientists did research that the NCR is interested in. She collected a little bit, but most of it is inaccessible. She has yet to find the main data backup to download it. Well, maybe as we explore, we can find it before she does. In another room next to what looks like corn, we find a terminal with some more notes from the vault dwellers. Here we learn that a man named Assistant Mathers went into the caves at 6:45 and never returned. They sent some security to find Mathers, which included a man named Dr. Peters. Apparently he went along to help aid Mathers with any injuries he might have gotten. But when the security detail returned, Dr. Peters was horribly wounded. After this, they shut the doors to the caves. Whatever was in those caves likely killed Mathers and has wounded Dr. Peters. The last entry must have been made long after other events transpired. The vault is actively under attack by some unknown enemy. Another doctor named Dr. Bailey is watching over his sick wife, and with Peters out of commission, there's no one left in authority to manage this level of the vault. The author of this note is begging for security to come down and help. Please, send security up at once. Could they have been under attack by more spore creatures? This door likely leads to the cave that we've heard about in the terminals, but when we try to open the door using the wall-mounted terminal, we can't. We try to disengage the lock, but it says that it's inaccessible. We need to find a key. Continuing to explore this level, we find some of the spore creatures up close and personal. Because they lie facing the ground, they don't really notice you very well, and they're slow to rise, but when they do, they attack quickly. And if you aggro too many at once, they can quickly overwhelm you, especially if you're squishy like my non-armored gunslinger character here. So it's better to pick them off one by one from range if you can. In another laboratory filled with more plants and science gear, we find a terminal. This gives us science records from the scientists working in the vault. Since this is the food production floor, most of these involve experiments done on food. The corn we saw earlier was indeed corn, but it was a hybrid corn that was bred to respond better to artificial light. That would explain why the plants in this vault don't need a whole lot of sunlight to grow. They were specifically bred to grow well using artificial light. It's here we learn that Dr. Peters must have become deadly sick from whatever he picked up in the cave. He has missed work for 3 days in a row. This fellow scientist of his thinks that he's just being lazy. One of the plants that they were experimenting with secreted a strange substance designed to attract insects. This may explain why we found the mantises near the door outside. Perhaps they were attracted to the liquid. Many more of the scientific staff are starting to exhibit signs of some sort of viral infection. They're coughing, hacking. They've been ordered to stay in bed and recover, but so many scientists are becoming infected that there are too few scientists left to continue with research. And at last we learn that Dr. Peters died. But most frighteningly, this scientist reports that Dr. Peter's corpse suddenly animated and started attacking people. He thinks that this is a horrible rumor that was in exceptionally bad taste. However, we have seen some of these spore creatures firsthand, and we can start to put things together. The scientists in this vault caught some sort of airborne virus that they caught inside a cave. This virus led to their deaths, and at some point they turned green and became zombies of some sort that attack you on sight. Perhaps we can find more answers if we go on down to the 4th floor. The 4th floor is the common area, residential rooms and cafeteria. Upon entry, we find the typical vault atrium. However, this stairway leading down to the 5th floor is blocked. This means we're going to have to get to the 5th floor some other way. Here we find the male and female restrooms. There's nothing really interesting here except a spore creature in one of the stalls. In the overseer's office, we find another terminal. This allows us to unlock 3 sections of the vault: the crew quarters, the data backup, which is going to be important for our NCR quest, and the cavern access. All of them work except the cavern access. Error. Override engaged at door site. If a manual override is engaged, then that means we're going to have to find some sort of key. But with the other doors unlocked, we can continue to explore this common area. Inside the cafeteria, we find a lot of bottles and seats for eating. Strangely enough, all of the containers meant to hold water are green. I don't know if this is just the lighting of the vault, or if we are supposed to walk away thinking that this virus not only was airborne, but might have been passed along through drinking water as well. Maybe it dyed the glass green, or perhaps there's still water in these containers infected with the virus. In the rec room, we find more plants being bathed in ultraviolet light, and a terminal. This has 2 more of Keely's logs. The terminal originally had some sort of trivia game on it. Keely was not amused. She says no one will miss these. But then she tells us that most of the vault dwellers died in this room. Most of them succumbed to the airborne infection. And we learned that it was Keely herself that converted many of the grow lamps to UV spectrometers to test the air for contaminants. This is indeed a clever scientist. Being a ghoul, she is apparently immune to the virus in this vault, and she's using the opportunity to detect the airborne virus to make the vault safe for humans. Her experimentation was successful. She found a range of ultraviolet light that highlights particles in the air that she believes are responsible for killing everyone in this vault. And we learned that it wasn't really a virus, they were spores of some kind. The spores are concentrated in lower levels of the vault and are drifting up here through the air ducts. At this point, Keely is concerned for the fate of the people of the NCR above ground. This has gone far beyond than simply a technology retrieval mission. And at this point, I'm really worried about Keely. We find her logs, but we have not yet found her. I hope she's all right. We can then take stairs to the lower level of this floor, where we find even more of the spore creatures. Through the maintenance door, we find a terminal that contains some tickets that had been filed before the vault dwellers fled. Here we see again the response to that ticket about the noises in the vents. Maintenance inspected the vents, but they could not find a source of the problem. A second ticket reported a possible gas leak. At least they think it's gas. Many of them are having respiratory symptoms. They did a diagnostic of the air circulation system and discovered minor discrepancies in the mass of air being pumped through the vault, but no harmful gases. However, they did detect a strange residue in the air filters. They swapped out the filters just in case. But we're starting to understand how so many people in the vault could have become infected. The air circulation system was circulating the spores that came from the caves. They're very active trying to figure out what was going on, might have made the problem worse. The maintenance men who changed the filters were exposed firsthand to these spores. Also while climbing in and out of the ducts looking for whatever was causing the noise. They then could have brought it back to the common area and exposed others to the airborne spores. Here we find a flamer with a whole lot of flamer fuel. I think Obsidian is trying to tell us something with this. We may need to use this flamer later. The next door brings us into the clinic. No monsters in here, but an interesting terminal that has a whole bunch of medical cases. Case number 162 is that of Professor Harrison Peters. He came to the clinic suffering a severe case of pneumonia. This is the pneumonia that he caught when he went into the cave to help retrieve the missing scientist. The doctors here noticed the spread of some sort of microorganism in his lungs. They tried applying the usual treatments, but nothing seems to be working. Then an entire group of vault dwellers showed up with many of the same symptoms. Pam, Michael, Samwise, Naoki, and Kenneth. Since Dr. Peters' condition has worsened since then, this has made the doctor in the clinic very nervous. He says, "I hope we don't have a contagion on our hands." We learn that Dr. Peters' body is actively rejecting any treatment that the clinic is trying to give him. It's so bad that the clinic is on the cusp of ordering an exploratory surgery. Another group of vault dwellers were admitted to the clinic. Elizabeth, Marcia, Amy, Herman, Veronica, James, Robert, Amanda, Donald, Iris, Stephen, Yolanda, Kelly, and Nicholas. Oh my goodness, this is indeed a contagion, with all of the same symptoms as Dr. Peters. Chills, a fever, a terrible racking cough. The doctors in the clinic immediately quarantined these people from the general populace. In the next terminal, they talk about Dr. Peters' death. We already learned that he had died, but these doctors were so curious that they ordered an immediate autopsy, whereupon that they discovered that his lungs were filled with some sort of fungal infection. The fungus, however, was not dead. It was still alive despite the death of its host. The doctors then sent a sample to the mycologists on the 5th level to see if they could identify it. Most disturbingly, the last entry talks about the reanimation of Peter's corpse. The reporting doctor in the clinic says, "I don't really know how to describe what just happened. One minute I was closing up for the day, and the next, Dr. Peter's corpse sat straight up and attacked me. He was able to flee with his life, and they locked Dr. Peter's corpse in the office." And it's here that the terrible truth dawns on this doctor. If this happened to Peters, and everyone else is having the same symptoms, this could be the fate of the entire vault population. While exploring the bedrooms, at last, we find the Vault 22 cave door keycard lying on a shelf next to a battery attached to a lamp. It's also in these rooms that we find Vault 22 jumpsuits. These are going to be important for the quest Suits You Sarah, which we will cover in another episode, so be sure to take all of the vault suits you find. But most disturbingly, in one of these rooms, we have to kill a spore carrier runt. This is a spore carrier that is disturbingly smaller than many of the others, and also in this room we find a baby carriage. Could this spore carrier runt be a baby or small child that became infected, died, and turned into this creature? I don't even want to contemplate that. With this floor explored and our path down blocked, our only option is to go back up to the 3rd floor and use the key card to activate the terminal to allow us to open the door to the caves. As soon as we open the door, we immediately get attacked by mantises. These must be the mutated bugs that were at one point attracted to the substance excreted by the experimental plants. Continuing along, we find a fork in the road. Going right leads us uphill towards the oxygen recycling floor of the vault. Inside, we do not find enemies, but it's here that we find the Hepa cartridge filters. These are important, remember, for the Brotherhood of Steel quest that we're not doing right now, but we can certainly save them to complete the quest later. The opening back into the vault is blocked, so our only option is to go back the way we came. We find a pathway to the left leading down to the 5th floor, but instead we're going to continue to explore these small pathways where we come upon even more mantises. And it's here at the very end that we find the Mantis Eggs. These are the eggs we need to give to Red Lucy in the Thorn. Heading back, we can finally go through the door to enter the 5th floor of the vault. This brings us to a laboratory. We can loot Tales of a Junktown jerky vendor on one of the desks, and here we find an active terminal. This gives us more information about the types of experiments that Vault-Tec was doing here. We learned that they experimented with the Venus flytrap. Vault-Tec genetically modified it to grow bigger and to spit a type of nectar that lures prey to its mouth. The next experiment was on Mantis Religiosa, and we learned that Vault-Tec brought the mantises with them. They were always here in the vault. They specifically tried to engineer a type of insect that exceeded in terms of predation. The praying mantis was the perfect one because it's voracious, has a natural camouflage, and they're cannibals. As good hunters, they were able to track down and eliminate pests, and when they run out of food, they end up eating each other, which keeps the population under control. And lastly, we learned that the airborne spores came directly from a Vault-Tec experiment. I'm probably going to be butchering this Latin, but the spores were called Bovaria mordicana. It was specifically developed to colonize the bodies of pests. Once it colonized a host body, the host dies, but the body continues to move by means of the fungal colony within it. In this manner, the fungus continues to move, to hunt down prey, and spray spores upon anyone who comes near it, allowing spores to populate new hosts. Well, come on, Vault-Tec. Good grief, couldn't you see what was going to happen? It looks like they did this experiment to try to get rid of pests, I'm assuming roaches and rats, but could they not see that this could potentially be transferred to humans? Or were they so arrogant that they thought that they could handle it, they could maintain and control the spores, that they could limit infection only upon the creatures that they were experimenting upon? As we clearly see from this vault, they failed miserably, leading to the ruination of the entire vault and the deaths of dozens of people. Continuing down, we fight even more spore creatures, and at last we come upon the Venus flytrap monsters. It's safer to dispatch these from a distance, but we must be careful because they can spit that nectar at us. And it's here that we see a very familiar friend. Glowing fungus in the cave just outside the window. Reminds me of my days building Vault 88. I got surprised by one of these spore carriers. I found one over a barricade and I thought I could shoot it from safety until it leapt up at me. I won't make that mistake again. This level is the toughest level. We not only have the Venus flytraps and the spore creatures, but we get swarmed by praying mantises. Once we kill all of the enemies, we find a room that has a terminal. This is the terminal that has the research data that Thomas Hildern asked us to retrieve. After downloading the research data, we can explore the final room to find a cave hidden behind a console that has been pushed away from the wall. Following it brings us to a very large chamber. It's great to have Boone with you when you're in this chamber because his companion perk highlights enemies. It's so dark here that you won't see some of the enemies until you come up right on them, but with his perk we can see them a great distance away. This allows us to snipe them from safety. Once all of the mantises and the spore plants have been safely dispatched, we can explore this large chamber. And following a light, we finally find Keely.
Took your sweet time. I suppose the NCR sent you? These plants have gotten completely out of control. I've got a plan to deal with them, but I'll need your help. Meet me on the second level, and I'll explain what needs to be done.
If we agree to help her, we meet her back on floor 2. She meets us at the elevator and compliments us on our repair work.
What's this? Did you do these repairs? Not bad. Not bad at all. Saves me time, I guess. See you upstairs.
On floor 2, she tells us her plan.
Good, you're here. Ready to begin? This place is filled with spores that are toxic to humans, and we need to get rid of them. I've pumped the vault full of a highly flammable gas that, once ignited, should destroy the vast majority of spores. There's one problem, though. The gas becomes semi-inert on exposure to oxygen, meaning the gas will have to be ignited close to where it's being introduced. I need you to find the vents where the gas is being pumped and ignite it. Oh, and survive the resulting blast.
All right, well, I do understand her argument. We gotta make sure that these spores do not leave the vault, otherwise it could spell the end of humanity as we know it. But do we really have to be so close to the blast?
Yes, there'll be an explosion when the gas is ignited, but I'm sure you'll be fine. Now leave me to my work.
This is an optional part of the quest, but if we agree to help, we can then go back down to the 5th level. Before we ignite the fire, we can loot a rare weapon. In a locked door with a very easy lock, we can go up a set of stairs, kill a few mantises to find a skeleton on the floor. Next to the skeleton is the AER-14 prototype laser rifle. Perhaps these are the remains of one of the mercenaries that was sent before us. He might have locked the door and hid himself away only to be attacked by mantises who worked their way into the room via the air ducts. We can also loot some energy cells. Here, as we were told, we find a distortion in the air next to some vents. Clearly there's some gas in these hallways, and we can use any flammable weapon to ignite it. Now we understand why Obsidian left us a flamer with so much flamer fuel. But really, any energy-based weapon can help here, including a laser. dear. All right, we're going to have to reset our strategy here. Let's try a little bit further away. Okay, nope, that's not going to work either. Next, I tried throwing long-fuse dynamite and then running back to the research lab and closing the door. But that didn't work either, and of course that makes sense. There are a bunch of air circulation vents all throughout this vault. I finally succeeded by throwing the dynamite, hiding in the room with the cave, closing the door, and then running back into the cave. From here I could safely witness the detonation. Once the deed was done, I could then go back to Keeley on floor 2.
Ah, good. You survived. I was beginning to think you hadn't. You'll be pleased to know that the spores should no longer be a problem. Now all that's left is to ensure that none of this ever happens again. The research that led to these abominations must be erased. I've managed to create a connection to the vault's backup system from here. I just have to remotely delete all the files, and we're done here. That's strange. The system says that the files were accessed recently and copied to an external source. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?
Yeah, we actually copied that data earlier for Hildern.
There's nothing for it, then. Those files need to be erased. Hold out your arm and I'll have it done in a flash.
Okay, well, we have a choice here, and this allows us to complete the quest in a number of ways. If we hand over the data to get erased, we don't get as many caps from Hildern when we go to turn in the quest. But if we refuse to destroy the data, Keeley attacks us, forcing us to kill her, and we suffer a huge karma hit. Now, if you have a science of 70 or above, you can pass an option that allows you to turn the data back into Hildern without Keeley turning hostile. But this character does not, so I'm just going to go ahead and go with Keeley and destroy the data. After all, we've already seen what this kind of research can do.
Glad you're thinking clearly. I was afraid to blink there for a second. There, all done. That wasn't so bad, was it? I've unlocked the door, so you're free to run along now. Although it pains me to say it, I wouldn't have made it out of here without your help. If you're heading back toward McCarran, tell Dr. Williams that she has my thanks as well.
Once done, we can head back to Camp McCarran and speak with Angela Williams to complete the quest.
Keeley just called in. You should have heard the director. But wait up. Now look here. She wouldn't let him finish a sentence. Just reamed him out for sending all those people to the vault. I've never seen his face so red and twitchy. Thanks for keeping her safe. Here's the caps I promised. I knew I had a good feeling about you.
If we go talk to Hildern, he thinks that we were not responsible for the loss of the data.
I received a pleasant call from Dr. Keeley. It seems we have you to thank for keeping her alive. Very charitable of you.
But once he finds out that you were complicit in the decision to destroy the data, he becomes irate.
You were a part of this? After we made an explicit agreement, you have the fucking goal to destroy priceless scientific data? The authorities are going to hear about this. They're going to know your name. They're going to know your goddamn face. Now get out of this office. Get out.
Well, he was a bit of a tool to begin with, so I'm not upset that he's mad at me. And finally, we can go back to the Thorn to hand the Mantis Eggs over to Red Lucy.
Good work, stranger. The Thorn will nurture these eggs until their hatchlings are ready to bleed for us. Here's a compensation for your service. I trust that we're in agreement over it.
And that is the story of Vault 22, another sordid tale of scientific hubris at the expense of humanity. To recap the story, Vault 22, unlike many of the other vaults in the game, was inhabited exclusively by scientists. Every human being there was a scientist employed by Vault-Tec to research 3 different creatures: the Venus flytrap, the praying mantis, and a fungus that produces spores. Vault-Tec was trying to re-engineer these plants to help humanity with pest control. That's right, Vault-Tec was trying to breed exterminators to put human exterminators out of business. It may be that these experiments were done on the 5th floor unbeknownst to the other scientists working on the other floors. This is why we find the other floors focusing on different tasks, like improving the oxygen output of plants and researching ways for plants to grow underground without natural sunlight. This may also explain why the scientists on the other floors were confused by the spore samples they found in the lungs of their own dead and sent the samples to the 5th floor. But the scientists on the 5th floor were reckless and allowed some of the plants and the spores to escape the vault, probably through air ducts, where they found their way into the cave behind the vault and reproduced, continuing to evolve for decades, without being monitored by the scientists on the 5th floor. As the population of plants and insects grew in the cave, they began to make noises that could be heard from the air vents within the vault. The scientists sent a security detail to go inspect, and upon contacting them from the cave and also the spores in the air filters, the spores transferred to human hosts, specifically Dr. Peters. Once Dr. Peters was brought back into the vault, the spores then infected many of the other vault dwellers, causing a contagion. Those infected died, and as they were designed to, the spores reanimated the corpses to hunt down further prey. 200 years later, the NCR sends mercenaries to the vault, all of whom probably died and suffered similar fates, having their bodies occupied by the spores to then attack you when you arrived. But this leaves us with one burning, unanswered question. Whatever happened to the dwellers of Vault 22? Did they all die after getting infected by these spores? Well, no. Most did, but some survived, and we will discover their ultimate fate when we do our video on the Zion Canyon, so stay tuned for that. One thing I love about Fallout New Vegas is that each location is tied to 3 or 4 different quests, each of which will send you to even more locations. In the process of shooting this video, I was introduced to a whole bunch of more locations that I will make new videos about. So if you want to make sure that you do not miss my New Vegas videos when I publish them, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell icon to become notified. And I've been working hard with Teespring to create a bunch of Fallout 4 and Oxhorn themed shirts, so if you're interested in picking up a cool new t-shirt, check out the link to my Teespring shop in the description below. And if you like what I do and you want to support me in a more personal way, consider becoming one of my patrons on Patreon. Patreon subscribers gain access to a private channel on my community Discord server, as well as a bunch of other cool Oxhorn perks. But more than anything, I'm just so glad that you're here watching this video with me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow morning, bright and early, with a brand new video.